Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 49. We're almost at 50 of the Fitness Devil podcast. Andrew Coates here with Dean Guido just sitting alongside me. Today we have Pete Dupuis joining us. He's the co-founder, general manager of Cressey Sports Performance, and he talks a little bit about his own personal brand that he's doing sort of as a small side project on top of Cressey Sports. We talk about some of the timeless principles that have contributed to 11 years of success in business. We talk a little bit about how Pete is surrounded by a lot of famous fitness professionals. Perhaps he's lived a little bit in the shadow, but coming into his own brand. We talk about partnering with other fitness professionals and the benefits of that networking. Lots about youth athletics and the appearance of injuries more recently. And about family, time, work balance as a fitness professional. So stick around. It's a great episode.
Shut up and sit down.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in to this week's podcast. And today we've got Pete Dupuis. So Pete is the co-founder and general manager of Cressey Sports Performance. And if you aren't yet familiar with CSP, we're talking about one of the premier athletic training facilities in the world. These guys boast last year baseball, Major League Baseball, their American League Cy Young and National League Cy Young Award winners, Corey Kluber and Max Scherzer, respectively. If you don't know baseball, that may not mean much to you. I'm a fan. So, and they work with some of the best Major League Baseball pitchers and players, all the way down to minor leaguers, high school prospects, not to mention athletes from all kinds of other sports and everyday adults in general fitness too. So welcome, Pete.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Cool. All right, so let's jump right into it. So that's not all. Pete, you've been stepping out into your own your personal brand, coaching business clients and speaking at conferences. And I've actually seen you speak twice in person. Could you tell us a little bit more about your expanded direction of your career?
Sure. I don't know that I would say that it is a strategic big move in any way. It definitely qualifies more as a side hustle than a dramatic career shift. I just find that after, now 11 years of doing this, we hit 11 years this past Friday, I accumulated enough experience to pass it along. And I have kind of found some opportunities to step in front of some audiences and speak to people like yourself and share some insights on gym ownership over the last couple of years, and ran with it because I think that one of the things I missed out on for the first 6-7 years that I was doing this was that networking piece and getting out and meeting other people outside of New England. And it was just a blast. So I think that it went speaking opportunities translated to consulting inquiries, and I maintain a handful of consulting clients at any given time. It is not a big piece. It's 3 to 4 gym owners at a time in 8 call chunks. So it's not like something that's eating up a big piece of my schedule or my day-to-day or my bandwidth. It's kind of an entertaining way to mentally separate from the grind of running CSP and get my head inside of other gyms and see what other gym owners are doing, share my insights, and pass along more, I'd say, of what didn't work for us than what did, which people don't necessarily appreciate coming in. But I think there's a lot more to learn from places where we tripped up or opportunities missed, and that's kind of what my consulting qualifies as.
Yeah, one of your 2 presentations that I saw, you actually talked about, I think it was 5 things that you guys learned over the years that really helped you, and then I think it was like 5 major mistakes that you learned from.
We got a few. Anyone who says they don't have them is full of shit. So
good, we got them to swear.
We got one swear.
Yeah, all right, there you go.
I was going to say, recently, has there been anything that you've kind of picked up from any gyms you kind of consulted with or been at recently, just with kind of all these new trends going on in, I guess, the fitness industry?
I have a hard time saying specifically one thing that I recently took away. I would tell you that every gym owner I talk to, I learned something from. And every single time I publish a blog, it's almost exclusively based on a discussion I had with a consulting client. So I think they do a nice job of triggering things in my head that I've learned without realizing learning. Yeah. And other times I'm recreating what I see these guys doing. I mean, pretty much everything I do is recreating something I've observed, be it in a social media context or through a conversation or You guys mentioned you've chatted with Mark Fisher in the past. He and I have a standing monthly call where we get on the phone and we just talk about what is and isn't working in our world. And sometimes it's to commiserate, and other times it's just to catch up. But that's the way I learn, mostly through networking. And I kind of think of my consulting as networking conversations as much as it is nice that they're paid. They are opportunities to chat with other gym owners in that context.
Well, especially with Mark, I mean, being able to do that with Mark all the time. Mark is, you guys have had a ton of success. We'll get to that shortly. But I mean, Mark is also someone who's been on a stratospheric trajectory in terms of what he's done and his appeal and his success in our industry. So it's got to be really amazing to be able to do that with him regularly. And I know you guys also have that event Disrupt that you do together.
Yeah, I selfishly really take advantage of this network that I've been able to kind of back my way into. I mean, obviously having a business partner like Eric Cressey, who's as connected as he is in the industry, it gives me the chance to take advantage of those contacts. And it definitely gets my foot in the door to talk to people that I otherwise would not have been able to get on the phone for casual, quick conversations. And I was saying to someone yesterday, we just announced our fall seminar. The date it's in October, and we try and bring in a keynote, kind of a guest lecturer each year. Last year we brought in Jordan Syatt, and this year we're bringing in Pat Rigsby. And that's an example of me basically selfishly saying, this is who I want to learn from. Let me take advantage of the fact that I'm coordinating this event and go out and pick somebody that I'm fascinated by. So I definitely abuse that privilege, but I'm doing so unapologetically.
We do it every week.
Yeah, exactly. I'm preaching to the choir.
I was going to say it too. Like, Dean beat me to it. Like, every week we get to talk to someone, and it's really cool. I'd say about 80% of our guests I've actually met in person, and most of them I could call friends. But occasionally we get someone like Jordan Syatt was on our podcast. So if anyone wants to listen to that one, it's actually really super. And you get some unique nuggets of Jordan's experience you don't hear anywhere else. But yeah, Jordan was just someone we reached out to through the industry, and he was happy to do it.
Yeah,
everybody else have been people that I've been able to sit down, have one-on-one conversations. You and I have had one-on-one sit-down conversations in person, and I feel like you get a ton from that.
Plus, you don't pay for them.
Yeah, I think it honestly is rare to run into somebody who isn't going to be generous with their time in this field. There are people who fiercely guard their family time, rightfully so. Mm-hmm. But as long as you are respectful and socially aware in the way that you approach the people that you look up to or you're hoping to gain some insights from, they're going to be receptive to it. It's just the people whose approach sucks that are maybe they get a bad impression from somebody and they think it's that person's fault, not their own. So social awareness is key in connecting with these people in the network that you talk about.
And one thing that so Mike Nelson and I have kind of created a relationship over the last 6 months or whatever the hell it was. But one of the conversations was I appreciate some of this stuff. And he's like, well, most people I talk to don't follow through with stuff, or they just take. And I think that if you are trying to better the industry, or you're coming from a place where you really want to learn and that they're going to follow through, I think that makes a big difference on how you kind of distribute your time, because you can tell within 5 minutes of talking to someone who and what their intentions are.
100% agree. The difference between givers and takers is pretty obvious. It's funny in our field. I think you've got to just pour as much material and content out there as you can to gain that following, and then kind of the more nuanced stuff is what you get into maybe behind that paid wall. Yeah. And that's actually a tough concept for my wife to understand, because I'll say to her, I'll ask her to take a look at a blog, maybe edit it for me. And 50% of the time she'll read it and I'll say, what do you think? And she'll say, I think you're giving too much away for free. and we'll agree to disagree on that front. But I think that's the nature of this field. It's give until you run out of ideas, and then hopefully in doing so, you're going to accumulate a following of people who believe in your insights and are reaching out for further.
What I was going to say was, with this podcast, especially, one of our key goals is any of our core listeners, and we have an established base, I want them to get to meet and hopefully follow and interact in whatever way that's beneficial to our guest with each guest as we get them on. And each guest that we've had on has basically had the experience where they've gotten new followers. In some cases, it's devoted, interactive people, and I'm hoping it leads to business. And I think it has in at least a few cases, at least already. I want to actually share the people that I've been following for a very long time. I've followed you and your stuff before I had actually met you in person. I was excited.
That's awesome.
And then he stalked you and tried to talk to you.
Well,
he tracked me down. Well, he's not intimidating at all when he approaches me at the seminar.
Well, so here's Pete. Right, so I've had similar experiences with a few other people in Kansas City this past May. Stan Efferding was just there hanging out, and he was kind of quiet and did his own thing, and only a few people even knew who the guy was. And Stan is the most famous person in the room. So I actually sat down and chatted with him a few times. He was really nice and really pleasant, and gave me his phone number and sent me a copy of his vertical diet. But I remember the year before where you had been there, and I saw the list of speakers. Like, oh, Pete, I can't wait to actually see what Pete has to say. Because I'd found you on the Fitcast, so I follow that, and Kevin Larrabee, who I know is an old intern of yours as well. So a lot of the people I follow in the industry, I've learned who they were from that, right? So now I'm trying to do that for a generation of our followers we're not as big as a Fitcast by any means, but we're doing okay. So and here you are just chilling at the back of the room, and I couldn't help but get this sense that because you're the guy who wasn't the trainer in a room full of trainers and coaches, that and I think you're just kind of a quieter personality anyway. You're just kind of chilling at the back, doing your own thing. So I actually made the point of going over, saying hi, and sitting down and talking. And then we got the chance to do it again in Seattle when you were presenting, and you and Mark Fisher were there for that one. And yeah, like I took the opportunity because it didn't necessarily seem like, at least at first, a lot of people were going over there and trying to interact.
Yeah, I absolutely qualify as the guy behind the guy. When you start looking at my career trajectory within fitness, I'm better known as Eric Cressey's business guy than Pete Dupuis business mind, which is perfectly fine. I knew what I was getting into. There were no surprises here when I made a decision. Honestly, the timing couldn't be better for this conversation because I've got a blog specifically addressing the question whether it's a good idea to put your name on your business or not. That's going to go live almost as soon as we hop off of this recording.
Yes.
And it touches on the pros and the cons, because I'm not going to say definitively that it was a great idea or it was a terrible idea. I'm going to outline both, and I'll give you a verdict if I could do it again at the back end of it. But for me, there was no moment in this process where I had these kind of expectations that suddenly I was going to become a industry presenter on a regular basis, and that's what this was going to translate into. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to be the guy who keeps the trains moving on time at our gym and make sure that the administrative components and the back end of this business is functional, so that a guy like Eric or a guy like Tony Gentilcore could just coach. All we want them to do is what they're good at. And that's the whole reason why having a business guy in your gym is a good idea. And it's not necessarily sustainable or a viable option for all new gym owners. But in our case, we had the opportunity to integrate it, and it made sense for us. And I think it did become a competitive advantage and gave us kind of a fast track to capturing market share or brand awareness. But at the same time, I'm incredibly aware of the fact that it's a big expense to take on for a new kind of gym that's just getting off the ground.
I actually have a couple of thoughts I want to throw in there because I've actually read, we'll start with your blog. So guys, we'll get to the point where later on where we'll tell people how to find you, but Pete's blog is fantastic. It's really, really great, especially if you're interested in the business side of fitness. This is actually a must read. So guys, seriously, grab onto that if you're anywhere near that. I've read Eric Cressey talk about the naming as well and how he has at times lamented having put his name on the brand. And there's sort of reasons for that. And I think we'll leave it to people to read your blog to find out more about that one.
Oh, I don't mind discussing it in detail, to be honest, if you want to, because I know that this podcast will hit the internet after that blog. So it's not like we're giving away special secrets here. Okay. And I am not fiercely protective of my ideas. The point here is to give them to as many people as possible.
I think it's something good to go down, because I think that just from our experience, a lot of people listening are kind of going through that process. Like, obviously different levels, but I think that that's probably some good information. So let's go down there.
Sure, let's hit it. It's funny. So I can tell you definitively that I did 3 pros and 3 cons in this list. And the ultimate verdict was that it's a bad idea. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't do it. But let's see if I can remember them, considering I've been fine-tuning this draft for the last 24 hours, and I'm now kind of drawing a blank a little bit. I'll tell you the pros of it to start, because this is not a a definitive no, don't do it. There are things that we took away from this that were phenomenal for our business. And the first one being that if you are somebody who is opening your own gym and you're entertaining the idea of putting your name on it, then it's probably because you have filled a personal training calendar, right? You are figuring out a way to maximize the efficiency of these hours you're putting in. You want a bigger piece, right? That means that you have already established a little bit of brand awareness or brand equity. So it can be justified. In that sense, your name has already earned the trust of people to fill a schedule. So there is some brand equity. You got a little bit of momentum. We actually took a list of about 40 clients into day one that we were able to convert the bulk of into clients. And it just dramatically reduces the risk of failure in the early stages. The question you have to ask yourself is that pro outweighing the long-term cons that I'll get into? The second reason that I think it is a good idea is because in this field, there's nothing, actually in all aspects of life, there's nothing more important than your reputation. And if you want to really challenge yourself, put your name on the sign out front, because your reputation's on the line and it's going to extract a next level work ethic. And so I would contend that in doing so, it's going to all but force you to go all in, and you can't afford to completely shit the bed. And then what was my third pro? That's going to come to me in a second. Forgive me. It'll come back to me.
Fine.
That's okay.
But let me first address any questions or issues you take with anything I've said so far.
No, it's fantastic. And I'm going to tell you what I know one of the cons is. If you ever want to sell the business.
That's con number 3.
Well, and the main thing I was going to say is, like, this is for, like, opening up a gym.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is not building an online brand. Like Jordan Syatt should be Syatt Fitness. And I like that Dean is doing, he's got his own online brand personally. But we're talking about
Which Dean? Just say it for us, please.
I'm talking about Dean Somerset.
Good. Okay, thank you.
The second Dean.
You probably don't know this, but of course we have a running joke.
Dean, right?
He lives 10 minutes from, like, I just call him.
We have him coming up in a couple episodes. So Dean, we have a running thing, Easter egg joke with Dean. Somehow he just, first maybe say 7 or 8 episodes, we just happen to mention him. It's some sort of relevance.
He always pops up.
Then
And you
Dean,
did it. You did it this time. It wasn't even us. We didn't
you did it.
We didn't even force it.
So he was our first guest too. But
you got to remember that he's very much a part of my network because he's so tight with Tony Gentilcore. Tony's one of my co-founding business partners, and he's still one of my closest friends, despite having left our business. Dean, if you're friends with Tony, Dean is an extension of that friendship.
They're basically married at this point. Like they travel together.
They were. I know that Dean was at Tony's wedding. I understand, and I met Tony this May in Kansas City. We both did, and Tony was fantastic. What was I going to say about this? So anyway, Dean listens to these and realized that, wait a second, we've mentioned him in every episode. He's like, I appear at every one. I'm like, okay, cool. So
he said we're stalking him, and then I was like, well, we're saying your name every time now.
So now we do it deliberately, but you actually just did it before we had to think of a way to insert it. It was like, that's perfect. So.
But the problem, so basically for gyms, we're going to say questionable because we know your verdict. But like if you're having an online business, it's probably not a horrible idea. So,
not at all.
Not to get confused with it.
Your reputation is everything in that context as well. I mean, why bother creating something generic unless, kind of as Andrew mentioned, your long-term objective is to sell it. But I don't think anyone gets into the online service provider segment with the mentality that they're going to flip that list into some sort of massive sale. Doesn't mean it's not doable, but it's absolutely not on the top 5 objectives when somebody sits down and talks about what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
I pulled up the draft and I can't believe I forgot.
Cheater.
Yeah, exactly. I'm cutting corners here. But the pro that I failed to mention is an important one, and that is that if you have an existing personal brand, a website, a social media presence, something of that nature, and you're considering opening a gym and labeling it such, one of the things that helps you do is skip that awkward phase where you're trying to find your voice. So you're trying to figure out what the personality is of that brand, right? Because there is this awkward moment where you're making a strategic decision. Are we going to be the quirky, crazy guys? Are we going to be the really deliberate, thoughtful, we'll say science-based training facility? Or are you going to be something in between? Or are you just going to try and do what half the fitness world is doing and recreate Mark Fisher fitness, even though that's a bad idea. Like, are you doing all of the...
Mark's going to text you and be like, fuck you.
He should. I like receiving texts like that from Mark. But the point is that your personality is there. It's out there already. So if you choose to go any route other than what it has been as far as tone and approach goes and all the content you've been putting out to that point, then it is lacking authenticity. People are going to see straight through the bullshit, and you're not going to get anywhere. So you skip that step entirely. And when we opened this business, the audience that we were speaking to already existed. Eric was writing for T-Nation. He was speaking on Perform Better Summit tours. He had published a couple of different products. And so we had the voice. It was done. There was no time wasted worrying about that. We were doubling down on that piece. And these kind of strategic brainstorming sessions about who we are just didn't need to happen. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it's already on autopilot. Like, yeah, that makes sense. You didn't have to develop it. It was already in motion.
Yeah, he'd been developing it for 25 years at that point.
And Cressey's a machine, an absolute machine for productivity and what he's legendary for doing.
I kind of want to hear, so like, obviously cons, verdict, not going to do it again, but yeah. What's the cons? Because now I'm like wondering, what would it be called prior?
Well, the cons are pretty easy. I'd say they're kind of common sense, but you don't think about it initially. One of them is that there's only one of you.
Yeah.
And you can't take care of every client as you scale the business. And if you scale it to the point where you have multiple facilities, you can't be in both places at once. And I'll tell you right now, there is not a single scenario where somebody has called, a parent of a high school athlete and said, "Can I have an assessment, but with anybody other than Eric Cressey?"
So where's Cressey? Where's Cressey at?
The absolute opposite. Half those calls are, "So am I going to work with Eric?"
Yeah.
I say, "Well, Eric doesn't even live here right now. He's in Florida for half the year." And these are hurdles that I've figured out how to get by, but they're hurdles nonetheless. And that if you're the guy whose name is on the business, that's stressful as well, because as you scale it, you're putting your faith in a lot of people to hold your reputation in their hands. So
that's
an
actually
issue
crazy.
that is very, very, very big.
You guys have done a really good job of creating an internship program and having systems to find and recruit the best people, coach them and train them, and actually deliver a world-class experience. And you even said to me in person that Cressey is legendary for his programming and a lot of stuff. You've actually said to me that you have coaches in your facility who you feel are actually probably even better coaches than Eric is. And that
don't put him on file saying that.
I think he'd say the same thing if you were to ask him. And our whole objective is to hire people that are better than us.
Yeah. And that's not a knock on Eric. Eric's a legend, but it's just to say that you guys have found people who may be better at that aspect of it.
And I know we're going off script a little bit, but do you think, and this might be just looking back, do you think because his name was on it, that maybe, at least in the initial stages, you did push it harder and you did try to get that reputation because his name was like right on there? Like, does that make sense? Well, that whole accountability piece, like, do you think that helped move it forward faster, or probably not?
Well, I think he answered that earlier in saying that because you have put your name on it, you have to back it.
But would that have changed if would you still be as successful if you went back in time, if the name wasn't on there?
That's a tough question for me to answer because it's not my name.
Yeah.
For me, I think intuitively or innately, I knew that that's a good reason to do so.
Yeah.
But that's a question better presented to an Eric Cressey or a Mike Boyle or a Joe DeFranco. We're talking about, like, they're the ones who really have to own it. For me, I could just live in the background like I did. You guys had no idea who I was until at least 2015. And so it's a difficult one for me to say definitively I was protecting Eric's name. But I will say that everybody who starts a gym or any business for that matter, if they're in, especially at the ground level, they're an investor or an equity holder, there's not a whole lot of days off, and that's their own call. They don't take any passes on that stuff. So I was pushing hard nonetheless. I just don't think that there were moments where I gotta make sure that this is protecting Eric's name and legacy.
The one thing I will say is I think that now that you mention all those names like the Francos and Mike Boyle, I think back in the day, without all this social media stuff, that name actually probably carried the word out faster, if that makes sense, because it was a definitive name. I don't know if that's recreatable now because it's easy to get your stuff out there.
I think it depends on the name. Let's just say that let's use Dean Somerset.
Let's use Dean Guido.
If Dean Somerset, who is rather well known in our industry, if he all of a sudden decided to open a gym and slap his name on it, I think that would carry. But if you're still, like you said, an up-and-comer who really hasn't created that brand equity behind your name, probably doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that when we got into this in 2007, the market wasn't saturated like it is right now. So Twitter was launched less than, I think, 60 days before we opened our business. Facebook was a thing, but it was not epic. Instagram didn't exist. Snapchat was not even a concept yet.
YouTube was 2 years old.
Were not there. What?
YouTube was 2 years old at that point.
Exactly, and these things were not. They were social media platforms that we were becoming aware of, but that wasn't a point in time where people thought that social media needed to be an imperative part of your business. And so we got into the game when there were less players, and the biggest names, the heaviest hitters at that time, were the ones who had their names on the gym. So we ran with it. Yeah. There was no moment. There's only one person who ever said to me, "This is a bad idea," early on, and it was Alan Cosgrove. And he basically made a scene of me at one of the business kind of mentorships that he hosted through Perform Better when I went down to Providence. And it was a kind of a building your business type entry level deal. And I was fresh out of an MBA program. So honestly, a lot of it was very, very elementary, just basic accounting, basic like P&L statements, the real like big rocks of gym ownership that you don't usually have coming in, because it's usually personal trainers who are launching a gym, not someone with an MBA from a program like that. And I remember him saying, raise your hand if you put your name on your business. And I think I was either not paying attention or I was writing something down. And he's like, "Pete, raise your hand if you put your name on your business," to the whole entire room. And I look up and I'm like, "Oh shit. Okay." Hand goes up. And he's like, "Pete put his business partner's name on the business. And he will regret it." And here I was, this arrogant new business owner. We were probably maybe 18 months in, and we're in the middle of that astronomical growth stage where you think that, double-digit growth year after year after year is just the way it's going to go forever. And I remember sitting in the back of the room thinking, this guy has no idea how good we're going to be. And now I should just issue like a mea culpa, like, yeah, you got me. You were right.
You should tag him in the end of the article.
Things worked out pretty good for you guys anyway. Speaking of.
I was going to say, so speaking of all of this, let's go back to kind of like what founding principles, because regardless of the name, the business wasn't just successful because Eric Cressey's name was on the thing. So what are some timeless, I guess, basic principles that we'll just say business owners can build upon that has made you so successful in 11 years, and you basically recently celebrated 11 years. So like, what are those basic principles?
Oh, I think, I've already mentioned one of them, and that's a commitment to authenticity. Yeah. So don't ever deviate from who you truly are as far as the message you're delivering, the style in which you're delivering it. People can see through that very quickly. So we never did that. And then from a basic principle standpoint, we never sat down and outlined it. This was before there were brilliant, business minds telling you that you need to have your core values on the wall and you need to have your big rock objectives. For us, our objective was to collect more money than we spend and accumulate as many believers as we could and put them in as many CSP t-shirts as we could. But we did have a pretty firm commitment to identifying an underserved population and just trying to capture all of it. And so when we got our hands on that baseball piece, we were just so fiercely protective of it, and we wanted to own that niche. And that is kind of one of the principles. I think that you gotta find your target demo and just hammer away at it as much as you can.
Cool. I was just trying to cue Dean here to make sure they tied in his next question with what you just said about baseball. He looks confused. So
no, I get it. But we could talk athletics because, like, I think so. Even if we go down that, so you guys kind of, I would say you niched up. But let's talk youth athletics and just even going around the injuries that seem more common with younger athletes as things go on. And I guess, why is this occurring? Is it the specialization piece? Like, just from your guys' experience in your realm, what do you see as the main issue going forward in youth athletics and injuries?
Well, I'll preface my answer with a definitive, I am not a fitness professional in the sense that I'm not evaluating the athletes. I'm not writing the programming.
You see
I don't understand kinesiology. I know what you would say is enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
But having pitched 4,500 athletes in the last 11 years on our services, and most of them being baseball players, I am acutely aware of the fact that there are a lot of kind of recurring injuries that we see in these populations. And I think that, yes, some of it is because kids are specializing too early, and you've got 12-year-olds declaring themselves baseball players and nothing else in a sport that's creeping closer and closer to being a year-round sport. And that's an absolutely terrible thing, especially for these pitchers. So I think that there is some truth to this argument that early specialization is increasing injuries. Sure. But at the same time, I think that there is a certain component of the ability to spread the word through social media and the internet and these things now, that it's just so very easy to put things on everyone's radar. And they think that because they're seeing it today, it's just a new thing. But kids have been having Tommy John surgeries and elbow procedures, and people have been blowing out ACLs. It was happening when I was in high school. I had teammates who did it. Yeah. So it's not like we're creating these injuries for the first time in this new social media world. It's just that it's very easy to blast it all over your radar that it's happening. So that's not to say that this isn't a function of bad coaching and overuse and things of that nature. But there's a little bit of a component of that where it just seems so prevalent because it's so visible to you now.
Yeah, we see it now. It's in your face.
Well, that makes so much sense, because before you're dealing with survivorship bias, where all the ones that are successful and not getting hurt is mostly what you see.
Now you see all of it.
Now we see all of it.
And everything in between.
And I think another factor that I figure probably makes sense with hockey concussions and some of the injuries in baseball, whatever, is you're dealing with athletes who are bigger, more physically mature, stronger because of training and nutrition at a younger age. You're dealing with greater forces that are acting on these bodies. You have faster skaters skating around, hitting each other. You know, those extra forces are going to probably result in injuries just on an aggregate level because of how much you're seeing. Right? So
I don't disagree with that at all.
Do they even know what hockey is at Cressey?
You guys,
we worked with a handful of hockey players. I mean, we're probably only about 25 to 30 miles from Mike Boyle's strength and conditioning.
Okay.
And I'd say that he's got a pretty good hold on that niche in some capacity, having, his experience with BU and just hockey in general. So it's not a market that we chase, but it's certainly a market that we serve. Because, I mean, I've said in the past, and I think I've even had this discussion with you, Andrew, that if you position yourself as the best at something, everybody's going to assume that you're better than average at everything else.
Yeah.
And so it's very common for me to hear from a parent of a hockey player, and they say, hey, I know you only train baseball guys, but I have this kid who plays hockey. Can you help him? And I know how to give that pitch every day too. It's just that, you got to be prepared for the conversation and understand that it comes down to differentiating your services in a way where I say, look, there's a misconception that I give out the baseball program, but I don't. I give out the athlete-specific program. Yes. The fact that they're a baseball player dictates the direction that we go with the screening process. Yeah. And there are certain red flags that we're looking for because we know you play baseball, but we also know what many of those red flags are with a hockey population or a volleyball population, and so on and so forth. So as long as I convey to a parent that we're individualizing for the athlete and not the sport they play, it's pretty easy for me to close that sale.
Yeah, I love that, because somehow I didn't start out as wanting or even being interested in training athletes, and just somehow this past year I've gotten a huge pile of young hockey players. Mm-hmm. And the way I approach this, and I actually sell the parents on, is this whole conversation about over-specialization early, and I treat their strength training, quote, as a different sport with different forces and vectors acting on their body to make them more resilient against those injuries, based on that theory, and try not to replicate hockey movements like weighted slap shotting with a cable machine. No, I actually want these kids to get super strong, super durable, fast. You get somebody strong,
just not to injure them.
They're going to be good at sports just simply by being more physically strong and better conditioned. Their coaches in their sport will teach them the hockey skills or the baseball skills. You're not teaching Max Scherzer how to throw a cutter or a changeup. You're making Max strong and more resilient against injuries, right? And so I think that's the best approach when you're dealing with any kind of athlete. And I'm a little wary of anyone like that trend towards sport-specific training. I think it went really too far a while back, and it feels like the industry's kind of pulled back from that and now is getting more focused on just generally making these people really strong.
I I 100% agree. I think that the first thing that I make sure to emphasize during these conversations with parents and even athletes is that my primary areas of emphasis in what we're doing here are injury prevention first and increasing athleticism second. Yeah. I don't say throwing harder or hitting a baseball further. I say increasing athleticism. And the byproduct of doing those things and taking care of yourself nutritionally, getting plenty of rest, following the rules outside of the gym, those are the things that are going to result in increased velocity. But I'm not going to promise any of those things because I can't control such a big piece of the puzzle. Yeah. I can't decide what food goes on your plate when you leave here. I can't decide what time you're going to get yourself to sleep. I can't decide whether you're going to replace your orange juice with water. Those are things that I cannot be accountable to because I have absolutely no say whether you are going to be accountable. So the promises I can make are that if you follow the rules inside of the gym and you respect the rules outside of it, then yeah, you're going to throw a baseball a hell of a lot harder over time. But it's not my job to do all of that, and it's very, very dangerous to align myself with those kind of specific metric-driven outcomes because there are just too many variables, you know?
So I got one thing I wanted to say because hopefully we'll have some people who have kids growing up who are listening to this in addition to our fitness professional group or they have their own kids.
Hockey's better than baseball.
What would you say to parents of young athletes about how to approach their kids?
Well, all the other stuff outside of the gym.
Yeah.
Like that's the...
But even their...
I think there are different levels of what I'm going to say to those parents depending on the age of the kid. But the first thing I'd say is let your kid be a kid. You know, I think that one of the first times I saw Mike Boyle present, he was telling a story about how a parent asked him what the best piece of equipment is for their kid, and he said a bicycle. and I couldn't agree with that more. And from the perspective of a parent, you know, I'm into parenting now, not parenting an athlete by any means. I have a 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. But I know that the only way my kids will find their way into a training environment of this nature will be if they are excited about it. And so there are a lot of kids that we take care of every day of the week who are here because their dad wants them here, not because they want to be here. And the dynamic that creates is one where the athlete resents the process. They ultimately resent the sport and they burn out and they resent their dad. And so my piece of advice to the parents is cultivate interest in your kids, but know when enough is enough based on their reaction to it. And I hope that makes sense. It's, you know, there are a lot of different directions we can go with conversations with parents, but for me, it comes down to, are they excited about this? Because it's a really high price point to be coming in here and just punching the clock and burning your parents' money.
Yeah, and if training becomes something that's an energy suck for that individual child, like that's just systemic stress out. If they're not going to see good results, they'll burn out.
Yeah, this is supposed to be the best part of their day when they come in. Yeah. I want guys excited to come through the door.
Totally. And that's that whole play piece. I don't know. I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Pat Davidson. But like, play is almost how kids can foster a lot of those skills, even outside of the gym. And I think that gets lost in like just not fun. Have fun. It's so general.
And we want that to carry into the older population as well. I mean, we're running a summer program right now. We've got 28 college guys from all over the country who moved into town for 10 weeks for a really intensive program. And their movement days or recovery days are Wednesdays and Saturdays. Yesterday, their movement day started with a spike ball tournament. Yeah. And we paired them into teams. And the rule was if you lose your first game, you got to do a certain number of sprints. You lose your second game, you're going to do a smaller number. If you move through that third round, that is your movement day. And that's fine because it keeps guys engaged. It creates community. It's physical activity and they have a blast. So we're not afraid of integrating games like children's level type approach to, we'll say, adult level mentalities.
Here, boys, here's some bikes. We're going for a bike ride, and we're going to go off some dirt jumps.
Exactly.
I probably won't protect. Let's go to social media. And I think it was you that did the challenge. Anyways, long story short is your social media kind of highlights a lot of your family life. And I think that a lot of people, especially on Instagram, get kind of lost in this work side and trying to grind and hustle. How important is this family time or this balance between your family and work life? How important is this to you? And any information or tips for people struggling with this balance? Because that's a huge portion of your career.
Well, I hate to beat a dead horse with this authenticity thing, but that's what it comes down to. I mean, if you know me, if you've met me in person and you've spent some time socializing with me, you know that I'm going to be someone who identifies as a dad first, a business owner second, and then a business consultant somewhere after that down the road. And if I fancy myself a dad first, and it's what's most important to me, it's the first thing I think about, then I'm not going to filter that out of my kind of public-facing persona. Yeah. It's who I am. If you're gonna work with me in consulting, I'm going to ask you how your wife and kids are at the start of every call. And I would expect you to kind of get into the habit of doing the same thing with me. And I get excited to talk about it. My kids are, like I said, they're almost 2 and 4 years old, and I think they're the funniest people on the planet. And I'm not afraid to share that in a social media context. Mm-hmm. But I think that there is a time and a place for each of it. And by time and place, I mean it can't be the entirety of your strategy. And the place piece is there are certain platforms that it plays better on than others. So if you're friends with me on Facebook, you probably know that my oldest son's name is Colin. Because I obnoxiously share all the stupid shit he says, and I just think he's like a comedian that doesn't realize he's a comedian. But you're not going to see a lot of that in my Twitter or maybe on my Instagram. And so I think strategically about how I use the other platforms. The Twitter and the Instagram are a little bit more business-minded. So if you look at my Instagram, kind of my series of photos, my gallery, you've got a very business-minded approach to the content I share. And actually a strategic visual approach to it. But if you watch my story, my Instagram story, that's where the family life kind of blends into the mix. So I am nothing if not consistent in the way that I use these platforms. And I think that in doing so, I don't antagonize the people who give me their attention. So the people who choose to follow me don't feel like I misled them and that I go too far in one direction or the other. I'm consistent.
They know what they signed up for, and if they stuck around, you're going to give them what they signed up for, essentially. Because that's you weren't changing anything.
Exactly. And if they leave because they didn't like it, then that's a really good thing, because what's going on over there isn't going to stop.
I'm still posting it.
Yeah.
You don't have a ton more time, so we got a couple things we clue up every episode with. All this talk about family life and work balance. There's one of my favorite books that exists. It's a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It really hammers on aspects of that. So we just had Alex Viada on the podcast, and the poor guy struggled to come up with a book. He just likes going back and reading old textbooks, which is interesting. But we always hope that everyone we have on here, and I know you're going to have something great, actually reads a book. Like, please, for the love of God, read. But have something to share with the audience, the listeners.
Okay. Well, I'll start by saying that my book guru is always going to be Mark Fisher. Absolutely. The guy reads more than everyone I know in the world. So when I'm really digging for my next read, I just send him a text or hit him with a request and say, what's it going to be next? And it's funny, I mentioned this because when Mark and I presented alongside each other at the Disrupt event you mentioned, somebody in the audience asked him a question about the book, The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, that came out. And he said, good, not great. I wouldn't touch it. And so I ignored it for a while. And then Eric put it on my desk a couple weeks ago. I read it in 3 days and loved it. So I think that we're all going to consume information differently and have different attitudes and opinions. But I did enjoy that. I'm actually reading Measure What Matters right now. And I can't remember exactly who wrote it. I think it's Doerr, Doerr, I think is his last name. And it touches a lot on kind of building your long-term strategic objectives into your business and how that kind of can facilitate the culture you want. And I have been really, really happy with it. It's I'll put it this way. I'm buying 2 more copies and I'm putting them in Eric's hands and our director of performance, John's hands. And I want to make sure that the 3 of us talk about how we can integrate those concepts. So as much as that's business specific, it has the end game, the objective is to make myself and my business more efficient so I get home earlier to play with the kids. So work-life balance actually does play a role in that. And for me, I'm reading business stuff because I want to get better at doing more in less time so that I can get back into the backyard and play on the swing set.
I totally buy into that. Culture Code, I recently read it myself. I noticed maybe 7-8 months ago, it seems like it just popped up on everybody's feed. The people like Luca Hocevar is always blasting books out there. And at first I'm like, all right, this one looks a little too trendy, but I eventually got to it. It's actually really good. Mark is great for this. So yeah, anyone who doesn't know who Mark Fisher is, like, just you need to know who he is. Go follow him.
He'll tell you if he likes it or not.
He's a big...
He put one on Instagram, was like 3 out of 10. Just like lit on fire.
There was something recently that and actually, I had looked at this same book. It's a book called Relentless by Tim Grover.
Yeah, he buried it on his Instagram.
Yeah, buried
absolutely murdered
like
the guy.
five like his consecutive posts. I was like, Mark, stop.
Yeah, so Mark and I actually chatted about this. And so Grover is kind of a rah-rah motivational speaker type. And he was Michael Jordan's trainer years ago. So that's his claim to fame. But Mark just thought this book was utter trash. And I looked at it and I didn't read it, but it also kind of had red flags for me. And then for Mark to really do what he did with it, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to pass on this one. Here's actually a good piece of advice. I've heard this a couple times. If you start reading a book and you realize it doesn't have any value for you, it doesn't resonate with you, then what you've already invested in is a sunk cost. Just scrap it. Move on to something else that's better.
Yeah, because it'll take you 10 times longer to read it. I've tried it, and now I just stop.
I'm totally guilty of that.
So social media.
I just keep going.
Yeah. Well, and then it like takes forever to read it. You're like, oh, I just want to read this other book. And I'm like, now I've like caught myself. I'm just going to read the one I want to read. The cover looks better. Okay, let's do the social media. You got to go. Where can people consume all things you, both on the family end and on the business end, and just where do they find you?
If you're interested in the family piece, shoot me a friend request on Facebook, and
I want
you
to see
will
your
hear
family.
Some of the most absurd things you've ever heard a 4-year-old say. But that's where I share my blogs, and that's where I share some insights on things learned at running Cressey Sports Performance. But Facebook is a pretty authentic representation of who I am as far as friends, family, and business. It's all there. It's a mess of it, and if you ask my siblings or my immediate family, they'll say I overshare and I don't shut up on Facebook, but I like the platform. If you like business content, like sharing ideas that I've learned from reading and things like that, that's where I'm all over Instagram. So my Instagram is at Pete_Dupuis, and same goes for my Twitter. And that's where I'm sharing quotes I found. That's where I'm sharing links to articles that I really like. I fire off a newsletter every Friday called My Friday 4, and that's business content, typically from outside of the world of fitness. So concepts that I pull from things like maybe the Harvard Business Review or, who knows, reading Seth Godin's blog, things like that. If I find something that really catches my eye and inspires me to write some content or think differently about the way I run my business, I share it in my 4 articles at the end of each week.
Guys, I can't stress enough. Like, seriously, sign up, put your email on his email list and get this, because this is really, really good. Pete, thank you so much for coming on.
It was awesome.
Really appreciate it. I'll say to the listeners too, guys, if you're actually someone who knows Pete and is finding us for the first time, we have had guests like we mentioned, Dean Somerset, Mark Fisher, Jordan Syatt, another one of your old interns, Sohi Lee, has done a podcast with us. There's a lot of people from our shared world who have already been guests. Check one of those episodes out. If you really like it, maybe you'll stick around. And we should have Dean coming back in the very, very near future, John Goodman, and a couple others. So, yeah. Pete, thanks so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Shut up and sit down.